My husband and his father tried to kill me and my son for inheritance money. The Rodriguez house in Portland, Oregon, looked like a timeless treasure. Its tall windows reflected the morning light. The brick walls held decades of memories, and the wooden staircase carried the weight of countless footsteps. Rebecca Rodriguez, 36 years old, paused for a moment at the kitchen counter, listening to the creak of the hallway floorboards above her. To anyone else, those imperfections were signs of age, but to her, they were pieces of a story she had come to cherish. "Mommy, look, the clouds are making animals." 7-year-old Marcus called from the living room window, his small hands pressed against the glass as if he could reach the sky itself. Rebecca smiled. Marcus's imagination was like a stream that never stopped flowing. Every morning brought a new adventure, a new picture painted in his mind. Rebecca poured orange juice into a glass and called him back to the table. Breakfast at the Rodriguez house looked ordinary, yet something felt slightly off. Antonio Rodriguez, Rebecca's husband, came down the stairs with his usual polished appearance. He was 42, tall, handsome, and always careful about how others saw him with colleagues and neighbors. His charm was magnetic. At home, however, there were moments when his smile did not reach his eyes. "I have an important meeting this weekend," Antonio said as he ruffled Marcus's hair. "If it goes well, it could change everything for us. Daddy will bring you a special gift." "I promise." Marcus's eyes lit up with hope. Rebecca kept quiet. There was something in Antonio's tone she could not shake. He had been different these past few months, ever since Rebecca's father had passed away and left her a large inheritance. The grief was still raw, yet her husband's restlessness seemed sharper than grief. Frank Rodriguez, Antonio's father, added another layer of tension. He often called unannounced, reminding Rebecca that he would be visiting soon. Frank presented himself as distinguished and wise, but Rebecca knew the truth. Frank saw Rebecca as inadequate, never quite worthy of his son. With Marcus, his affection came with conditions, expecting the child to behave more like a miniature adult than a carefree little boy. That morning carried all of these unspoken threads. Rebecca tried to focus on Marcus's laughter, but her mind was unsettled. She felt the presence of shadows she could not name. The Rodriguez family seemed picture-perfect from the outside, but within its walls, a quiet storm was beginning to gather. The following days carried a rhythm that felt both familiar and uneasy. Rebecca busied herself with preparations for an upcoming exhibition at the Portland Art Museum, a project she had dreamed of for years. It focused on forgotten female artists of the 20th century, women whose work had been overlooked or dismissed. Rebecca poured her energy into it, telling herself that dedication to art would ground her. Yet in the quiet of the house, shadows lingered. Marcus, with his endless curiosity, often drifted into Rebecca's study while she worked. One afternoon, the little boy held up an old photograph he had found in a box of belongings. "Mommy, is this Grandpa?" he asked. Rebecca looked at the faded picture of herself as a child standing beside her late father. Her chest tightened. "Yes, sweetheart. That was Grandpa when he was younger." Marcus nodded, but then whispered as if protecting a secret. "Grandpa talks to me sometimes. He says I should be careful." Rebecca tried to laugh it off. Children often blurred dreams with memories, and Marcus's imagination was famously vivid. But the words planted themselves in Rebecca's mind, growing heavier with each passing day. The tension deepened when Marcus quietly confessed one evening, "Mommy, I saw Daddy on the phone with Grandpa Frank. They were whispering." "Daddy said you would not notice." Rebecca paused. Antonio did take countless work calls, often in hushed tones. Still, there was something about the seriousness in Marcus's eyes that made Rebecca uneasy. She brushed her son's hair gently and replied, "Sometimes adults keep secrets for work, but thank you for telling me." Even as she reassured Marcus, a wave of doubt crept into her heart. Late one night, when Antonio claimed he had gone to bed early, Rebecca walked past his study. The door, usually locked, was slightly ajar. Inside, files were stacked neatly, but one drawer remained open. Her eyes fell on a folder marked life insurance. Her hands trembled as she scanned the documents. Just 1 week after her father's funeral, Antonio had taken out a high-value policy in Rebecca's name. The beneficiary was Antonio himself. The air felt suddenly heavy, her pulse quickening. She set the documents back as carefully as possible, forcing the drawer shut. Her mind raced. Why now? Why so soon after the inheritance? She tried to rationalize perhaps Antonio was being cautious, providing financial security, but something about the timing felt chilling. The next morning, Marcus lingered by the window again. "Mommy, I dreamed about the basement," he whispered. Rebecca froze. The old servant's basement, sealed off decades ago, had only been mentioned once in the property report. She had never spoken of it to Marcus. "What basement?" Rebecca asked cautiously. "The one with a secret room." "It's for hiding when bad people come," Marcus answered with complete seriousness. Rebecca forced a smile, but her chest tightened. Dreams or warnings? The line between the two was becoming dangerously thin. Friday evening arrived with a heaviness that clung to the walls. Antonio had kissed Marcus on the forehead before leaving the house with his suitcase, insisting that his business trip could not wait. Rebecca had nodded, though the knot in her stomach grew tighter. After he left, she found herself walking from room to room, touching furniture, opening and closing doors, as if checking whether the house was still truly hers. Later that night, while Marcus colored pictures in the living room, Rebecca noticed a movement outside the window. A man in a dark coat walked slowly along the edge of the property. He paused near the garage, then circled toward the backyard. Rebecca's breath caught. She quickly closed the curtains and pulled Marcus close. "We will stay inside tonight," she said, forcing a smile. But inside, unease spread like cold water. When Marcus went to bed, he begged, "Mommy, can I sleep in your room?" Rebecca hesitated, then agreed. The child clung to his stuffed bear as if it carried all his courage. Rebecca kissed him good night, trying to ignore the echo of her son's earlier words. "Daddy and Grandpa Frank are planning something bad." Sometime past midnight, Rebecca stirred awake. A faint chemical smell seeped through the cracks of the window. Her throat prickled. She sat up sharply. Gasoline. Heart racing, she crept downstairs to check the doors. When she reached for the back door handle, it refused to turn. Panic rose. She tried the side door, then the front. Everyone was locked tight from the outside. A mechanical hum followed, and metal shutters descended over the windows, sealing them in silence. Smoke began to creep beneath the kitchen door. Marcus, awakened by the noise, appeared at the top of the stairs, clutching his bear. "Mommy," he whispered, trembling. "We need to escape right now." Rebecca's chest tightened. "What do you mean? Where can we go?" Marcus's voice shook but carried conviction. "Behind the pantry. Grandpa told me in a dream." The smell of smoke thickened and faint crackling sounds grew louder. Rebecca grabbed her son's hand and ran to the pantry. At first glance, it was just a small closet filled with shelves of canned goods and flour jars. Marcus pushed aside the lower shelf and pointed. "Here!" Rebecca knelt and found a wooden panel. She pulled hard. It creaked open, revealing darkness. "Go, sweetheart," Rebecca urged. Marcus crawled inside first, the stuffed bear tucked under his arm. Rebecca followed, pulling the panel closed behind them. The narrow passage smelled of dust and earth, cobwebs brushing against their faces. Rebecca's heart pounded as smoke seeped faintly into the tunnel. "Where does this lead?" she whispered. "To the garden shed," Marcus replied calmly. "Grandpa showed me." They crouched and crawled through the darkness, guided only by a sliver of light far ahead. Behind them, a loud thud shook the walls, followed by the roar of fire-consuming wood. The heat seemed to chase them forward. Rebecca whispered prayers under her breath, forcing her body to keep moving. Marcus never looked back, his small steps sure and determined. At last, they reached a rusted door. Rebecca shoved it open and fresh air burst in. They emerged into the cool night inside the shed. Rebecca lifted Marcus and stumbled out into the yard. Behind them, flames had already devoured the house. Black smoke twisted into the sky. and the glow of fire painted the neighborhood in a sinister red. Sirens wailed in the distance. Marcus tugged his mother's sleeve. "Mommy, let's go to Miss Patricia's house," he urged, naming the neighbor 2 doors down. Rebecca held him close, her eyes filling with tears. "You saved us," she whispered. Marcus looked up, his gaze steady. Grandpa was watching. He knew Daddy's plan. Rebecca trembled at the words, but she did not argue. Holding Marcus tightly, she ran toward Patricia's porch. When the neighbor opened the door, Rebecca and Marcus stood covered in soot, their faces pale with terror. "Please," Rebecca gasped, "call the police. Antonio set the house on fire. He tried to kill us." Though almost impossible to believe, Patricia reached for the phone without hesitation. Outside, the blaze swallowed the home that once held their lives. By the time fire trucks arrived, the Rodriguez home was beyond saving. Flames roared through the roof and the structure groaned under the pressure of collapsing beams. Neighbors gathered at a distance, whispering in disbelief as firefighters battled the inferno. Rebecca sat on Patricia's porch, holding Marcus close, both of them shivering despite the heat of the blaze. Her voice shook as she repeated to the officers what had happened. "This was not an accident. My husband planned this. He wanted us gone." The detective in charge, a gray-haired woman named Lieutenant Martinez, crouched down to her level. "Ma'am, that is a very serious accusation. Do you have anything that can support it?" Rebecca pulled her phone from her pocket with trembling hands. On the screen were photographs she had taken the night before. Images of the life insurance policy she had found in Antonio's desk. Documents that named him as the sole beneficiary. Martinez studied the photos, her expression tightening. "This raises questions, but it may not be enough on its own." At that moment, Marcus tugged on his mother's sleeve. With surprising composure, he spoke softly but firmly. "Daddy said if Mommy was gone, everything would be his. He said it on the phone to Grandpa Frank, and he said it should look like an accident." The officers exchanged glances. Martinez looked at Marcus, her tone gentle. "When did you hear that?" 3 days ago? Outside Daddy's study," he answered. "He was looking at house plans and told someone the security system was ready." Hours later, investigators confirmed what Rebecca and Marcus had described. Residue of gasoline was found around the property, poured deliberately at key points. Even more damning, the security system had been tampered with, allowing the windows and doors to be locked remotely. What had seemed like a frantic claim from a desperate wife was quickly becoming a credible case of attempted murder. Detectives began searching for Antonio. His supposed business trip unraveled immediately. Co-workers at his investment firm testified that no meeting had been scheduled. Within a day, police located him at a gas station along the interstate. In his trunk, they found a large stash of cash, falsified identity papers, and a burner phone. Antonio was arrested on the spot. During interrogation, he shouted, "I'm innocent. This was all my father's idea. He pushed me into it. When Frank Rodriguez was taken in, his polished facade cracked. At first he insisted he knew nothing, but when confronted with Antonio's accusations, his composure broke. That weak boy," he spat. "I sacrificed everything for him. I only wanted what was best." As investigators pressed him, the disturbing truth unfolded. Together, father and son had orchestrated the plan to eliminate Rebecca and Marcus, seize Rebecca's inheritance, and cover it as a tragic household fire. The financial motive was undeniable. Records showed that Antonio was drowning in debt. His image of success was nothing but a performance. He had been funneling money into failed ventures and supporting a mistress in another city. Frank, blinded by devotion to his son, believed removing Rebecca would free him to start fresh. The discovery sent a chill down Rebecca's spine. What she had sensed in Antonio's eyes, what Marcus had overheard in whispers, was now carved into hard evidence. As dawn broke over the smoldering remains of the Rodriguez home, Rebecca sat in the back of a patrol car with Marcus in her lap. She stared through the window, still in shock. The place that once held laughter, morning breakfasts, and childhood dreams had been reduced to ashes by the very man who had sworn to protect them. Yet amid the ruin, there was one undeniable truth: they had survived. And now, the truth about Antonio and Frank was finally coming to light. 3 months later, the courthouse in Portland became the stage where every hidden truth was forced into daylight. Rebecca sat on the wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly together. Beside her, Marcus swung his legs nervously, but kept his chin high. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, neighbors, and curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to hear how a respected businessman and his distinguished father could be accused of such a crime. The prosecution laid out the evidence piece by piece. Photographs of the tampered security system, reports confirming gasoline had been poured strategically throughout the Rodriguez home, phone records showing repeated calls between Antonio and Frank during the weeks leading up to the fire. The prosecutor spoke with measured clarity. The defendant, Antonio Rodriguez, intended to murder his wife and son in order to claim her inheritance. This was not a crime of passion. This was calculated, deliberate, and cold. Antonio's defense attorney tried to shift the blame. At first, they argued that Antonio's mental state had deteriorated under financial pressure. When that failed to gain sympathy, Antonio turned against his father. "He manipulated me," he declared from the stand. "Frank Rodriguez has always controlled my life. This was his plan, not mine." The courtroom stirred, but Frank's reaction silenced the room. Rising to his feet, his voice cracked with fury. "Do not dare put this on me, Antonio. I did everything for you. I carried out your wishes because I thought you deserved better than her." His confession shocked even his own attorney. But the most unforgettable moment came when Marcus was called to testify. The 7-year-old walked to the witness stand, holding his stuffed bear. The bailiff swore him in gently, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus's voice was small but steady. He told the jury how he had overheard his father on the phone with his grandfather. He repeated his father's words: "If Rebecca is gone, everything will be mine. We just need to make it look like an accident." He described the old house plans his father had studied and how he had found the hidden passage because his grandfather, Rebecca's late father, had told him in a dream. The prosecutor asked softly, "Marcus, when you say grandpa, which one do you mean?" Marcus pointed at Rebecca. "Mommy's daddy. He warned me about my daddy's plan." A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. It was not evidence in the traditional sense, but it was the kind of truth only a child could carry. Clear, fearless, and impossible to ignore. When Marcus stepped down, tears filled Rebecca's eyes. She knew her son's courage had carried more weight than any document. In the end, the jury returned guilty verdicts for both Antonio and Frank. Antonio was sentenced to 18 years in prison for attempted murder and arson. Frank received 10 years for conspiracy. Justice, though painful, had been served. 6 months later, autumn leaves drifted across the yard of a small cottage on the edge of Portland. The home was modest compared to the Rodriguez family's old estate, but for Rebecca and Marcus, it was a sanctuary. Warm light spilled from the windows each evening, and the scent of apple pie often lingered in the kitchen. What mattered was not size or grandeur, but safety and peace. Rebecca had returned to her work at the museum, slowly regaining her rhythm. Her new project, a foundation to support young female artists, had taken root. She named it the New Dawn Foundation, a tribute to the idea that life could offer another chance to shine after darkness. Part of her inheritance funded it, transforming what had once been a source of tension into a tool for hope. When she explained the name to Marcus, the little boy nodded proudly. "It means we can start again," he said. Marcus had also begun to heal. With the help of Dr. Sarah Chen, a gentle and patient child psychologist, he learned to talk about his fears instead of carrying them in silence. He made friends at school, filled sketchbooks with colorful drawings, and even had one chosen for a student art exhibition. On the paper, he had drawn 3 figures: himself, his mother, and his grandfather. Rebecca framed it and hung it in the hallway. One evening, as snow threatened at the horizon, Dr. Chen joined them for dinner. She had become more than a counselor. She was a steady presence, someone who had quietly stepped into their lives with kindness. After the meal, Marcus leaned against his mother's arm and asked, "Mommy, what is a real family?" Rebecca thought for a moment before answering. "It is not about blood alone. It is about people who care for each other, protect each other, and want each other to be safe." Marcus smiled, his eyes thoughtful. He glanced at Dr. Chen and added, "Then maybe she is family too." The three of them shared a quiet laugh, the sound blending with the crackle of the fireplace. For the first time in a long while, Rebecca felt the warmth of a true beginning. On Christmas Eve, snowflakes drifted gently past the windows, settling on the quiet street outside. Rebecca and Marcus sat together by the fire, the warmth of the flames wrapping around them. The old fears had not vanished completely, but the air now carried a sense of peace rather than dread. Marcus leaned against his mother's shoulder, clutching the same stuffed bear that had traveled with him through fire and fear. Rebecca kissed the top of his head. "Your courage saved us, Marcus. You gave us a new life." Marcus looked up, his voice soft but certain. "We saved each other, Mommy, and Grandpa helped too." Rebecca smiled, her eyes glistening. Perhaps her father's love really had lingered beyond the grave, guiding them through the darkest night. Perhaps it was simply the power of memory. Either way, Rebecca believed it had carried them when she had nearly lost all strength. As the fire crackled, Rebecca reflected on what had unfolded. She had learned that trust is not blind, and family is not defined by blood alone. True family is found in the people who stand with you in your most fragile moments, who protect rather than betray, who heal rather than harm. It is in a child's courage, in a friend's steady hand, in the quiet promise of a safer tomorrow. Hold close those who love you honestly, and do not ignore the quiet instincts that whisper when something feels wrong. They may save your life.